Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Imad, how are you?
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'm okay, alhamdulillah. How are you?
Alhamdulillah, I'm good, man. Alhamdulillah, I'm good. I mean, I've been a bit careful recently about saying everything's good because that's a bit not very true. So like when somebody used to ask me that question, I used to be like, yeah, everything's good. But I think now I'm a bit more, I'm okay. I'm not sure about the rest of the world. Um, but yeah, I think it's very different times, man. It's interesting how to even like have a conversation with Muslims nowadays because at the front of every Muslim's mind is the Palestine issue, and what's going on, with our brothers, sisters, especially when you hear reports about children and women being kind of killed as collateral damage, as if that's just normal. So yeah, man, I'm not really sure how I am exactly myself, but definitely difficult to say that everything's okay, like normal.
Yeah, I suppose the state of the world is. I mean, it's always in a sense, but it's just people talking about the situation in Palestine specifically. But I suppose it has heightened recently to an extent that I think people have just are fed up of it and have just like what, we can't take anymore. So literally,
Mm,
with especially with the escalation in the kind of eviction of the people in Sheikh Jarrah, I think that just kind of tipped it over the limit.
yeah.
More Muslims and non-Muslims alike, people are recognizing that it's unjustified. You can't even justify the atrocities that are taking place, in the occupied territory or illegally territories, as recognized by the UN. And I suppose people who are like the powerhouses aren't really doing anything. So people are frustrated and are taking to the streets, daily. So many
Mm,
tags, and they're trying to be who own these social media companies. The hashtags are being blocked, and but people are still finding a way around them. And the message will reach uh, to people, and social media is so powerful. Now we can know exactly what's happening inside the occupied territories, and minute by
mm.
and
I think definitely, especially the beginning when this all started, there wasn't coverage from any of the media companies about the atrocities in Masjid al-Aqsa, especially the firing bullets upon them and things like that. None of that was really covered. I think we became aware of that through social media. But anyway, what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to briefly explain what we're going to have today, what we're going to go through, so everyone knows what they can expect. And then inshallah we'll get Umar on, who's going to talk about something. So we've got three people today, inshallah. We've got Umar, Majid, and Hamdan. And we're going to try and cover, mainly trying to understand what we can do in this kind of situation. And secondly, and kind of probably more interestingly, is the history behind it. Like, how did we get here? How did we get to this place? So Omar is going to come first. He's going to kind of be speaking about the BDS movement and boycotting, which is more kind of what we can do. And this will kind of wake us up to some of the options we have in terms of what we buy and how practically we can actually get involved in terms of our relationship with Israel, and how we might even be accidentally supporting them in certain ways. So he's going to be first. We're going to talk to him for about 10 to 15 minutes. Then we're going to have Majid, and he's going to take us hopefully into more of a history kind of perspective. So we're going to look at Zionism as a whole, how it was able to exist, and what kind of caused weakness in Palestine in the first place. How come the Ottomans kind of lost their power there? And why did the British support the Zionist movement there? And also, we're going to look at kind of why. The last thing we're going to look at with Majid as well is a more contemporary issue of why Palestine, or why Israel doesn't take control of the entire area, and there's some kind of politics behind that, which hopefully we'll go into. So that's going to be with Majid, which is the next 20 minutes. So that's going to start at about 7:25 ish through till 7:55, and then from 8 o'clock through till about 8:20 and we've got Hamdan coming on, and again he's going to be more addressing what we can do next. So he's really going to be talking about why we need to unite, and he's going to again bring a bit of a contemporary perspective by why the Palestinians are being oppressed right now. How come no one really cares about them right now? How come that's managed to happen? How did we get here? And then going forward, how can we kind of try and stop that? And I think his ideas are going to be a bit more like, how can the whole Muslim Ummah kind of unite? How can we come together to try and solve these issues? So that's a brief overview. We've got 3 people to talk about these 3 things. I'm going to bring Umar in, Imad, inshallah, and then he's going to and then we're going to be discussing the BDS movement. So with Umar, there's a few. Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullah, Umar.
Wa alaikum salam.
Salam.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa
How are you,
barakatuh.
man? What's going on? Oh, you're live, man.
Alhamdulillah,
You're live
alhamdulillah.
to
Like you
hundreds of
said,
people
alhamdulillah
all
for
over the
me,
world.
but the ummah, I don't know.
True, man. No, that's
Pardon?
a true thing. No, that's very, very true, man. Alhamdulillah for us. Just with yourself, what we wanted to really kind of, what I wanted to understand from you anyway, is the effectiveness of boycotting certain companies. Like, what is because I know you work, you agree with the BDS movement and you kind of understand it quite well. So what is BDS and how does it help us? Like, how can that be a means of us boycotting certain products?
Okay. Let's start with BDS. So it basically stands for boycott, divestment, and sanctions. And it's actually Palestinian-led. It was started by them, and now it's a more global phenomenon. But like you said, the idea is to take money from companies that in any way contribute to Israel doing what it does. Because as we know, in the world, money speaks. And the best hurt any big organization is to attack the money. So the basic aim is to make sure that the Palestinians get the same right as the rest of us enjoy, to which we can affect barriers buying certain products. But divestment, although it sounds complicated, is more to do with companies that invest in companies that are Israeli-based or Zionism-based, and how to affect them so that they remove their investment from these companies. So we don't think of it straight away, but it's things like local councils, churches, and your pension funds. They take your money for your pension, and normally they invest it in some things. And usually, or in some, there are a lot of Israeli companies involved in them.
Umar, your connection's kind of a bit.
If we can affect that,
you're
such
breaking
that
up quite a bit.
These
Umar, you're breaking up quite a bit. Hello.
Stop investing in Israeli companies.
I don't think
you're effectively taking money.
I don't think you can hear us. Imad, is he breaking up for you as well?
Yeah, he's breaking up for me.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Umar, your connection's breaking up.
Give me a second. I'll try and change my connection. Yes.
Okay.
Give me a second. I'll try and change it.
Okay, if you can. Imad, how's your connection? Is your connection okay?
My connection is fine. How are you seeing me? Good?
It was okay, but at the beginning you were breaking up a bit as well, to be honest.
Ah.
But anyway.
You're really clear for me, like, and it seems that it's like
Alhamdulillah. I think carefully about my connections, man. Who else is here? So alhamdulillah. Umar's just come back and I'm gonna have to add him. He's
yeah,
back,
sorry, I couldn't see my phone. Is that better?
Yeah. So what I think what we're getting is it's not always the obvious companies, but you were thinking like it's a bit deeper than just buying something. It's more like where does your money end up, and it's more of a money issue, like, and making sure that you're not even inadvertently kind of supporting kind of Zionist kind of movement.
It's a case of waking up and realizing there's different ways that our money is used, and where it goes, we can affect that. Like I was saying, the boycott is quite straightforward. Most people are familiar with it. There's all these companies that we can sort of stop buying products from that have direct ties to Israel. Although I have to say, caveat on that is that we have to be a bit careful in that, not just because it's Jewish owned, we start boycotting it. We need to make sure that there's a link to Israel where they either support it directly, indirectly, and then we start our boycott. So a lot of people have done the research. The BDS websites have a few companies like Puma, Soda Water, or Soda Stream as it's called, etc. But what I want to wake people up to more is the divestment bit and the sanction bits, although it sounds out of reach for the individual Muslim. It's actually in reach if we realize how.
So has it had? Can you explain any effect that it's had so far? Because like I know that this stuff is really like it's been made illegal in some countries. The BDS movement, or it's been like opposed.
But I think that there is your proof. I think that there is your proof.
So
if it was not effective, it would not have been. 32 states in the United States have actually passed laws or motions that makes supporting BDS not legal, although that's your expression, your freedom of expression. But still, the fact that actually Israel is sort of spending money to convince these other countries and states in the US to actually pass laws or motions in government to prevent you being part of the BDS movement just goes to show that it is actually being effective. I believe there was a leaked document a few years ago, and the figure, let me get that right.
Imad, what are you thinking, man?
I just said, do we have like numbers? Like how
page down. So there we go. So a leaked Israeli government report estimated a loss of 1.4 billion per year. Okay, obviously, we're saying 1.4 billion for the big companies is not a lot, but this is the early stages of the BDS movement, where only the people who are really clued up are taking part in it. And I mean, let's say, for example, a company like Coca-Cola. If every individual Muslim in the world stops buying their product, if we're saying there's 1.5 billion Muslims in the world and only half of it takes part, on a monthly basis stops buying one product, you're talking about 700 million taken away from their wallets. It will have an effect in the long run, and as the momentum builds behind the BDS movement. I mean, what else? Page down on that. Right. I mean, the Israel lobby itself considers BDS as an existential threat. So they're not just saying it's a nuisance. It actually harms them towards in regards to actual existence. And there are countries like Luxembourg's state pension fund is withdrawing their money from all Israeli-owned investment companies, so they don't invest in them. That's what I'm talking about, the divestment bit. So pension funds and places like that, they do put money into Israeli business. But if we can get that money out by waking them up and making them realize that we as a community are not happy that our pensions are going towards these things, it will take money away from them. And there's so many things they do. They prevent the silence activists in academia by blacklisting them. We often hear it that so-and-so professor in so-and-so university loses their job because they mention something against Israel. I mean, that is obviously lobbying in the background by Israel to sort of prevent people from voicing their opinion, whether on the BDS or the whole sector in general. So BDS slowly is making a difference. And Netanyahu actually... Sorry. Yeah,
so BDS. So all BDS really does is does BDS do any other kind of campaigning, or is it just mainly focusing on kind of organizing this big boycott, or does it do other things as well to have this effect?
No, that's the thing. The point is the boycott, the divestment, and the sanctions. So there's that, and then there's also petitioning your MP, local government, to sort of actually enforce those sanctions. I mean, let's look at the UN. The UN comes along and says, yes, these are war crimes, but is there ever any action as a result of these findings? We rarely see any. I mean, to me, the UN is pretty much obsolete because there's no point going around saying, yes, it's a war crime, and then there's no action following it. But us as individuals, if we keep petitioning our MPs, local government, etc., in actually enforcing those findings is how we can help our Palestinian brothers and sisters. It's basically taking the individual and making it stronger, by joining them all together on one sort of mission.
And that's why BDS should be effective if we're all part of it.
How do we decide what products are eligible to boycott? Like you said earlier, it's not like companies owned by Jewish people. We need to make that distinction. But how is the general person meant to make that distinction when you go to a supermarket or when we invest? Or
I mean, the simple things is with fruits and veg, they usually tell you which country it's from. Medjool dates, for example, if you pick up a box, look at it, it'd say produce of Israel. As soon as I see it, I put it back on the shelf and walk away from it. We can do that with most fruits and veg that we buy. With the big companies, BDS has a pretty, on the BDS website, it's a pretty specific list, but there are other lists going around where we know for a fact that these are Israeli companies. So for Coca-Cola, they support Israel directly or indirectly. So Coca-Cola, Johnson & Johnson, etc. But there's also an app called Boycott. So it's BUICOTT. And on there are different groups, and there's one for the BDS movement, and it allows you to scan the barcode and it tells you where the product is from. Obviously, it's labor intensive initially, but once you're familiar with what you don't buy and find a replacement for it, it becomes second nature. I mean, I don't think my sister and I have ever bought a Coca-Cola product in the last 7 years. Not on purpose anyway. Or a Nestle product, not on purpose anyway. It just, you automatically do it without thinking much because, again, I think on the group we mentioned that in terms of individual things, I forgot who mentioned it, but basically the point of being consistent. But to be consistent, my point is we need to start slowly. There's no point putting pressure on all the Muslims saying, start boycotting this, 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 and this, because unfortunately, some of these products we do need as part of our daily lives. So until we find replacements, sometimes we'll just have to bite the bullet, as they say. Unfortunately, it's not us biting the bullet, as it were.
Yeah,
but
so I think like, I would say in terms of this, we're going to have to start drawing this part of our thing to a close. But I would say like it would make sense to start researching, start learning, figuring out which companies are kind of involved. Maybe, you know, start with the BDS website. I do like the length of the list on the BDS website. It's not extremely long. But even personally, I found things which I'm using at the moment. Like, for example, next time I buy a laptop, it's quite simple. Avoid HP. There's plenty of other decent companies out there. But that's just one simple thing I learned. And the next time I buy a laptop, I don't go with that company. Next time I buy my joggers, I avoid Puma. But just these simple things which actually make it possible. And I'm not trying to like, obviously, long term, I want to completely boycott Israel as much as I can. But at least practically, I'm doing two things now in my life.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like your favorite word there, Tadrij. We'll go with Tadrij on this one as well. And step by step, gradually. And we'll get there, inshallah. I mean, that's the thing. You have to find the replacements first. You can't just stop boycotting everything left, right, and center without finding a replacement. So it's a case of, for me personally, every time you do a conscious act of boycotting one product, that's one small victory there. You don't need to have boycotted everything to claim it as a victory. I mean, every time you do it, every time, you know, you see a bottle of Coke and you go, oh, I like that, but now I go for the other one because this one is X, Y, Z.
Well, there's other benefits of boycotting Coke as well, isn't there? Like, you know, you might just become somebody who doesn't like fizzy drinks after that, which would be even better. But Jazakallah, Umar, we're gonna link it. We're gonna stop it there. Do you want to say a final sentence, maybe?
No, just like I say, it's just being consistent with it once you started, finding your replacement and not putting too much pressure on yourself and just claiming the small victories until it becomes normal part of your lifestyle to avoid certain products from certain companies and go on from there. But inshallah, if anyone has questions, I'm always on the group chat as well, so you can always reach out.
Thinking Muslims WhatsApp group if anyone's not there. Jazakallah khair, Umar, and inshallah we'll see you soon, man. I was going to go through the comments a little bit. Should we go through the comments quickly? We've got a couple of minutes. Got a couple of assalamu alaikums. Jumel's here. Alhamdulillah. Ian's here. Chirano's here. Sheikh Abdul Alim is saying hi again. Imran Hussein's asking a few questions. There's a bit complex questions. He's saying that until we have our people in political and administrative positions, we'll always be weak. Do you want to comment on that?
Because we have Muslims who are politicians.
Yeah, we do have quite a few Muslims who are politicians, isn't it?
That's the issue. But it's just, I don't know. It's just so difficult. As in, you don't, because your MP works for you. So the one of the small steps you can do, and this is one of the many actions which have been outlined everywhere, as writing to your MP. And and if you can't write to your MP, there are so many template letters which are available to write to them, and then they should make your voice heard in Parliament.
Yeah. So the FOA, the Friends of Al-Aqsa, they have already got a arena. If you go on FOA website, they've got a good template there already, which is very simple to write to your MP. And also, like some people, one person sent me a message saying, well, instead of writing to your MP, you should try and lobby all the Muslim governments to do something. But we need to remember, first and foremost, we voted for that MP in your local area. Well, you should have voted anyway. And maybe maybe the person you voted for didn't win, but he's your MP and he's answerable to you. And if you send him a letter, he or she will probably reply. So I sent the letter, and you get a reply, and they actually promised to take it to the Houses of Parliament. But yeah, I think thanks for bringing that up. It is important to to use local politics, in that regard as well.
Regarding the boycott thing as well, people are like, people are like, oh, there's alternative products, like you said about the Coke. It will lead to better things as well. But you can have some alternative. Like in Asda, there's a specific brand of hummus, right? It's this premium hummus, right? I didn't know a product of Israel until Hamza, one of my friends, pointed it out, and then as soon as you realize, you can put it away, and there's alternative like brands. There's the Asda brand, and there's different kind of brands. So it's not like you have to go without. And the good thing about the BDS campaign, like you said as well, it's not a huge kind of list that's unattainable. I think the way they focus their boycott is on high impact, like a high impact strategy, small number of companies, which will have the most maximum economic impact to kind of pressure them economically and financially.
Ian saying that he's not sure, so hopefully Ian's going to learn about the history and politics, but he just knows that the bombing of civilians has to stop. Tayyib's here. Tayyib's another good friend of mine. He said he would love to be involved. We ended up going with just 3 people. Tayyib, inshallah, me and Imad, we've actually kind of planned to speak to Tayyib. We were meant to speak to him before Ramadan, but that didn't really happen. But inshallah, he'll be one of our guests in the future. Inshallah. He's actually a good friend of Hamdan, who's coming later. But yeah, man, let's move on a bit. We just got the name of the website, BDS. So Google BDS, and it should have take you to the website.
BDSmovement.net. So
okay, we're gonna move on. We're gonna get Majid in now, inshallah. Hopefully he's still here. And then Majid's here, brilliant. And then inshallah, Majid, inshallah, just briefly introduce what he's going to talk about. He's going to take us a bit more historical, hopefully. I don't think too far back, but I think we're going to about the early 1900s, from what I'm aware of.
People are of this misunderstanding and this myth that this state of Israel has been around for so long, but it only 1900s is the inception, as we will hear
from Majid. BDSmovement.com. Omar just reminded me, it's BDSmovement.com. Majid's coming in, inshallah. And let's welcome him, man. Assalamu alaikum
wa alaikum assalam. I hope you can hear me clearly.
Yeah, alhamdulillah, it's good, man. Connection's good. It's better than Omar's.
Yeah.
To be honest, alhamdulillah. Now, good to have you, man. Let's get started, man. I wanted you to speak a bit about kind of when Muslims had control of that area. I think we understand to be the Ottomans.
Yeah.
How did they lose their control, and where did who gained control?
So I mean, this didn't just start off in the 1900s. This is quite a historical problem. And so what happens, you had obviously the Khilafat al-Uthmaniyya, the Ottoman Caliphate, right? And the short-term trigger of the Ottoman loss of control was the events that took place in the First World War. But the bigger problem, the wider problem, were the events that took place beforehand. And the problem was rooted in the decline of the Ottoman Empire and the Muslims as a whole. As we know, before the decline, the Muslims were at the top of the world, right? You had Ibn Sina, Ibn Rushd, Al-Ghazali, Al-Kindi, all of these philosophers. The peak of sort of Muslim science and strides in mathematics, astronomy, This was taking place. But after the Crusades, what happened was the Europeans started getting on top. And so instead of the Muslims taking information from the Greeks and the Chinese and the Indians and translating it into Arabic, what the Europeans did, they took that information that the Arabs translated and they translated it into their languages. Now, one way they did this was they used technologies like the printing press. Now, the printing press basically made it easier for information to be mass spread widely, right? Whereas the Muslims didn't have this technology. So what they did was Gutenberg, he made the printing press sort of 300 or so 500 years ago, something like that. And what that allowed you to do was
so could you put a year on the Crusades as well? So when would you say that the Muslims' golden age kind of started to decline?
The Muslim golden age started to decline after 1095, which is when the Crusaders first came in and they massacred 700,000 Muslims and Jews and also Christians in the Holy Land. And what started happening after that, Arab and Anglo-Arab interaction started increasing, and the Europeans started extracting information from the Arabs. Now, as I was talking about Gutenberg, he sort of started the printing press, and that allowed mass production of science books. And what happens is that the intellectual hub shifts from like Arabia to Europe, because you have mass production of information spreading around. You got people like Copernicus, you've got people like Galileo, Newton, spreading information and science. And what happens is when the Muslims were introduced to the printing press, Sultan Bayezid II in 1485, he declared the printing press haram. Backed by all of the scholars, he declared it haram, right? So you already see the decline coming in. The narrowing of the Muslim mind is already starting to take place. And you think this is just an odd khutbah, you think. But no, in 1515, almost 50 years later, I might have got my math wrong there, but anyways, Sultan Salim I, he issues a decree that anyone possessing a printing press will be executed. So it's like you're like equating it with sort of like murder or rape or something like that, and owning a printing press. Like, this doesn't make any sense. So what started happening is this arrogant mindset of the Muslims, we're the top of the Muslim world, this kuffar technology, this can't be better than ours. This starts to creep in, and soon enough, Napoleon, he takes over Egypt. Right? And the Mamluks are located in Egypt. Now, these are the Mamluks that took over the Mongols some 700 years ago. So they're in this sort of mindset that we're the great Mamluks, right? We took over the Mongols. And they're literally fighting Napoleon on horseback and archers. So what does Napoleon do? He just shoots them down with his technology, right? Because they've advanced, the Europeans have advanced technologically speaking. Now, the decline of the Ottoman Empire, it's being known, it's become very apparent now. So 100 or so years later, now the events are starting to take place in the 20th century. The decline of the Ottoman Empire, it's so apparent. The Caliphate is actually named the sick man of Europe, right? The Europeans, the British would call them the sick man of Europe, because geographically speaking, Turkey, Istanbul, it is in Europe. It's the sick man of Europe now, because once it was at the top, now it's at the bottom. It's the sick man of Europe now, right? So huge chunks of the Ummah are they're being cut off by colonialism. It was very rampant at the part. Algeria was taken by the French, British took Mughal India. So the Ummah is already fragmenting, and technologically, Muslims are a lot weaker, and they had to rely on Europe and Western powers. It's a reality now as well. Where do you think the Arab countries get their technology from? They get it from the West. Even the construction in Mecca and Medina today, the big clock towers, etc., the German engineers are making them. This is a reality. So now what is happening is tensions are arising in Europe during First World War. Now we're really starting to get into the heat of the moment. Archduke Franz Ferdinand, as we know, of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, he's assassinated, right? And Germany uses this as an excuse to attack France. And because of that, Britain gets involved. And how does the Ottoman Empire get involved in this? Now, originally, Mehmed V, who was the Khalifa at the time of the Ottoman Empire, he said he wanted to remain neutral. He didn't want any involvement. But like many times in the Islamic empire, the Caliphate, the Khalifa, he wasn't actually the Khalifa. He was just a puppet. And this is exactly what was going on here. You had a group called the Young Turks, a group of progressive liberal thinkers. And what they did in 1914, Enver Pasha, who was the leader at the time of the Young Turks, he signed a treaty of alliance with the Germans without the permission of the Khalifa, Mehmed V, in November 15. In March of 1914, he signed an alliance with the Germans. So now the Ottomans are officially involved. The British can attack them fair and square. They're involved now directly. So in 1914, for the last time in Islamic history, the Khalifa announces a call for jihad. In 1914, the last time. It is truly one of the most tragic instances in all of Islamic history. So he basically calls for jihad because he has no choice. They're involved in the war now. And what happens in 1917? The British, they conquer Iraq. The once grandiose city of the Abbasids, you know, the House of Wisdom, the Bayt al-Hikmah. This was the great translation movement was taking place around here. They were translating all the works of the Greeks, but now it's been taken down. And this is a symbolic defeat for the Muslims. One after one, Istanbul gets taken down, Iraq gets taken down. And now, 1917, the Prime Minister of Britain, David Lloyd George, he says to General Allenby, he says to him, I want Jerusalem as a Christmas present. So in November 1917, General Allenby, he conquers Jerusalem in November, and he walks on foot into Jerusalem on the 11th of December, 1917. They just take it like this, without any real effort. They destroy the Germans and they destroy the Ottomans just like this. Now, what's happening on the way the Ottomans actually fragmented the Ummah? They used many tactics. So, for example, one of them, there was the diplomat Sir Henry McMahon, British diplomat in Egypt, and he assigned this guy called T.E. Lawrence of Arabia. You must have heard about him. He's very romanticized in Orientalism. British, they gave him £200,000 a month, and he used that money to persuade the Arabs to fight against the Ottomans. See what's happening here: divide and conquer. Right? What is happening is in Mecca, there is Sharif Hussein of Mecca, the 40th descendant of Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is the Hashemites. They are situated in Mecca, and they're basically what is happening is they've been ruling Mecca for the past 700 years because he Ahl al-Bayt. He has the political power. He has influence. But what is happening is, I mean, before 1914, he sent letters to the British saying that, you know, can you support me in toppling over the Ottomans because I want the Khilafah. He wanted the Khilafah. He wanted the Khilafah to be taken down from the Ottomans, and he wanted to assume the power. So the British didn't care before 1914. But after 1914, they started to care because it's now in their interest to fragment the Arabs against the Ottomans because they want to take over the Ottomans. So what happens is McMahon, he makes promises to Sharif Hussein. These are called the McMahon promises. And basically, he promises the Arabs land. He says that we are going to give you the Khilafah. If you help us take over the Ottomans, we will give you the Khilafah. And he makes these promises to the Arabs, and the Arabs, you know, obviously they fall for the promises. At the same time, in 1916, Sykes-Picot Agreement is taking place. The same land that the British are promising the Ottomans, they are now making deals with the French and the Russian for the same land. Do you know what happens? They literally sit at a table, a map in front of them. They are drawing arbitrary lines over the map, dividing this. Russia wants Istanbul. French and German, they want parts of Jordan, right? And so what is happening is this reminds you of the hadith of the Prophet. He said that there will come a time when the nations set upon you as if they are setting out for a feast. And this is what they did. They carved parts of the Ummah. They broke up parts. They don't know what's going on. They don't know the political factors, the social factors. They don't know which tribes are located where. Sykes and Picot never went to Arabia in their life. And they're dividing parts of the Ottoman Empire to France, to Russia, to Britain. So this is what's happening at the moment. And so what happens is the Arab revolt happens. The Hashemi forces in Mecca, with the help of the Egyptian troops sent by the British, they take over Mecca. Can you imagine? British forces, they take over Mecca with the family of the Prophet ﷺ, the descendants of the Prophet ﷺ, and they have reduced the Ottomans completely. And this is what happens. The fragmentation of the Ottoman Empire led to complete disunity, a fracture of the Ummah. The Arabs against the Ottomans, the Arabs massacred the Ottomans at the Kaaba, right? And because of this, they went in, like the British went in and they took over Jerusalem and they called it a crusade. This, you know, so 700 years ago, you have Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi, the great Muslim general. He united all of the Muslims against the Crusaders. And now you have Arabs, they want the land. The Ottomans, you know, they're not technologically advanced. The British took advantage of this and they took Jerusalem. Simple as. It's a sad reality. We can blame the British and the French, but it's a problem within the Ummah. That's the main problem.
MashaAllah.
Mm.
MashaAllah. Very powerful. MashaAllah speech there. 700-800 years. MashaAllah. I wanted to interrupt several times, but I thought, you're going and MashaAllah, very passionate for saying, and, and the historical lines. But I want a few possible questions, but just.
Imad, you're breaking up a bit, man.
You hear me?
Yeah, I can't hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
I think your connection's a bit breaky. Go on, have a go. Can you not sort your connection out?
Well, my connection should be fine. Hold on.
Okay, go on.
How about now? Can you hear me now? No.
Yeah.
We have to talk in it for a bit for us.
So yeah, Jazakallah khair. I was just saying a great analysis of 600-700 years of history, mashallah, with with the facts and figures. Just wanted to ask a question. So what was the reason for the decline of the Ummah, and when did that happen? Because I know you said there was a shift from the intellectual hub of the world being in Arabia to Europe, but wasn't it Europe to begin with early on when the Muslims in Andalusia and was sort of based there loosely kind of term, because I know you'd be aware of the simultaneity of different rulers ruling different parts of the world. So when did that begin? When did the shift start to begin when the Muslims declined, and how did we arrive?
So, okay, I think you were cutting out a little bit, but I was able to kind of extract what you were trying to say. So, from my opinion, and you should also watch this lecture by Yasir Qadi called 1914, and I think it's called The Formation of the Modern World or something like that. But it really started off with and after the Crusades and after the advent of the printing press. Has Imam Habib just left?
Is he not on the screen anymore? But yeah, just carry on. I've got.
Yeah, okay. Anyways, but it really started off there with the banning of the printing press. By the time that the Ottomans were just introduced to the printing press, you had printing presses in Hawaii and Tahiti, right? They were using the printing press. They were mass producing information and educating people everywhere. These are the countries, Europe. They were persecuted by the Catholic Church for literally having a science book in their hand. And now they've completely flipped over with the spreading of the printing press. So as you have the
banning of the printing press, what was the reason for the banning of the printing press?
Oh yeah, the banning of the printing press. There are a lot of reasons that the Muslims banned the printing press. One of the reasons was that there was this kind of attitude that this is a technology of the kuffar, right? So once when the Muslims, they were taking paper from the Chinese, garad, which was the kind of papyrus that the Chinese used, they were taking in information. I mean, even at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, at the time of Badr, when he took prisoners of war, I'm pretty sure he said that we will let your prisoners go if they teach our children to read and write. So Islam has always promoted education, and it's always promoted knowledge and development. But what you see here is a narrowing of the Muslim mind. So it's also that, but it's also like a kind of arrogance, because for the past 500 years, they've been at the top. So they're like, any technology that the Europeans can make, it can't be any better than our technology. We're going to continue using our technology. This is kind of nothing, right? And they kind of used like arbitrary excuses to ban the printing press. They did that, and then in 1515, that really took its toll. And Salim I, he declared that anyone who has a printing press, he would be executed. So it's a gradual fragmenting in the mindset of the Muslims that caused the decline, and a lack of open-mindedness to technological advancement and education and development. So yeah.
Now I can see like parallels even today.
Yeah.
Until right now, a lot of I know some scholars who would be very against the idea of using video to teach and to educate. Whereas in 50 years, we might think that's a bit of a ludicrous kind of fatwa to issue. But I mean, I can even see the parallel to the extent where some scholars would disown scholars who use video, because
Yeah.
you're just so far away from Islam. I think also, I mean, I can kind of see it from a bid'ah perspective. So they would say, well, we've always used. So I think my question would be, what would Muslims have used to educate themselves? How would their books would they have books?
What they did was they would handwrite books, like with pen, paper, and ink. They would handwrite it. But basically, what happens is with the printing press, you make stamps out of letters, right? And you stamp it with ink. You stamp the paper like a block of letters. You have it. You stamp the paper with the block of letters. You stamp the paper, and there you have a whole page of writing. So with that, you are basically allowed. So it's so easy. Even in economics, it makes sense. It's productive efficiency. You're increasing the productive capacity of your economy, and you increase the supply of information. You increase sort of like you increase your supply. Basically, that's what happens. And if you're increasing the supply of education and books, you're increasing standards of living in the country. People are becoming much more educated. People are becoming much more aware. You have a boom in intellect. You have loads of different people, like geniuses coming up because of this. Geniuses didn't just exist in the Islamic world. Geniuses have to come out. You need to plant the fields in order to get the crops, So once this happened in Europe, you had an increase in the intellectual mind of Europe. So and that's how they took over, basically.
Okay.
So it's simultaneous.
So I think that led to So now coming forward back to kind of after World War One, where we had the dividing. Like I can see the arrogance which would, like even like some of the allies which they would have created in this period would have kind of caused the Muslims to be divided as well. Like you said, the Ottomans were in one way, that half of the Arabian countries were against even their own Muslims. So I think this leads very nicely onto, I think, the next thing which we want to discuss, which is how come then, if the Zionists were taking Palestine, how come the British were so keen to support them? And also I think at the same time, the concept of how did the entire Muslim world remain so oblivious and so divided? Like, how did that not wake them up to unite against Jerusalem being taken, against Palestine being taken?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, that is a global phenomenon from the Muslim perspective. So what actually happened is in 1914, talk begins in the British cabinet of establishing an independent Jewish homeland in Palestine for the Zionists. Now, who were the Zionists? They were a movement that began in the late 19th century, developed by a group of highly influential, affluent, high-ranking Jews. And the goal was to establish an independent Jewish homeland, preferably in Palestine. Now, the most influential people in this movement, one of them is Theodor Herzl, and the other is Chaim Weizmann, who becomes the first prime minister of Israel after the state is established later on. Now, interestingly, the British actually first proposed the Uganda scheme to the Zionists. Counterintuitively, it was an immediate refuge from the Russian persecution, but the home wasn't promised in Uganda to the Zionists. It was promised in Kenya. So what he did is Herzl presented the plan at the Sixth Zionist Congress, but it faced resistance from the assembled delegates, and they considered it a betrayal of the 1897 Basel Program, which basically promoted settlement in Palestine. And they insisted that they only wanted Jerusalem. And eventually the British agreed to support the Zionist cause, but why? Now, there's some very interesting theories. Some of them are borderline conspiratorial, but the most credible ones are the ones that I'm gonna list right now. So at the time, the Jewish population in England was actually very powerful and wealthy. So like any politician, the British made promises to the Jews in order to amass their support, right? The British Parliament, they felt the need to support the Jewish population in Britain. Now, directly stemming from this reason, one of the richest and most powerful Jews in all of England at the time was Chaim Weizmann himself. And in particular, he was rich not because he owned some businesses, but he was in the business of producing acetone. and this was a necessary ingredient in the manufacture of bombs and explosives during the war. So what happens during the war? The supply of acetone and the price becomes crucial, because in World War I they started using chemical warfare for the first time in human history. New types of warfare is devastating types of warfare starting to be used. I mean, we all know about mustard gas, etc., and the effects that has on the respiratory system. Now, Chaim Weizmann, he was a chemist, and he patented a new technique of acetone extraction. And so he had a company that made acetone, and his expertise was acetone. And the Brits now desperately needed him to increase the supply of acetone by 1,000%. So, I mean, he's a very influential figure. He's the president of the World Zionist Federation at the time, which was that kind of like oligarchy of very rich, affluent, influential Jews. So what happens is when the issue of payments came, like, you're going to produce the acetone, what should we pay you? The British say. Chaim Weizmann, he says, we don't want money. I don't want money. What I want is an independent home, a national home for the Jews in Palestine. That's what he says. So he doesn't want any of the money. He wants Palestine. The third reason, this is to do with the fulfillment of the Jewish kingdom and to do with messianic prophecies, to do with the second coming of Christ, Isa alayhi salam, we believe as well. There are parallels, but it's hugely different. Our theological understanding of eschatology compared with Christians and Jews. In fact, actually, many Muslims don't know this, but a lot of evangelical fundamentalist Christian groups, they are the most hardcore Zionists, because they believe with the second coming of Isa alayhi salam, this will be the fulfillment. When the Jews are all in the Holy Land, they believe basically Isa alayhi salam will come down and he will finish all of the Jews, right? And this will be the kingdom come, right? Your kingdom come, your will be done, etc. All of that. This is what they believe basically. Also, there is more sympathy from the Christians towards the Jews than the Muslims, because Jesus was a Jew. He came for the Jews, right? Jesus even says this in the Bible. I have not come I've only come to the lost sheep of Israel. He says this in the New Testament. So the Jews, the Christians believe the Jews are just misguided, right? They don't believe in Jesus, but Jesus was a Jew. So they believe they've kind of missed the boat. Now Muslims, however, we aren't even on the path of guidance according to Christians. We follow a false prophet, na'udhu billah, right? We are considered heathens and barbarian by the Christians at the time. And David Lloyd George, the Prime Minister at the time of Britain, he was an ardent Christian and he was a pro-Zionist. In his statements, it's clear that he had very Christian tendencies when he wanted to conquer Jerusalem. So, there was pro-Zionism coming from Christian theology here. So after discussions between British government and European Zionists, it finally reaches the cabinet and becomes official. Should we vote or not? There was only one Jewish member in the whole cabinet, and that Jewish member, his name was, I think, Edwin Samuel Montagu. You should write this down. We should actually know about him. He was the most vocal opponent against this cause of Zionism. Why? Because he thought it's not in the best interest of the Arabs or the Jews, because it would cause anti-Semitism. It would cause conflict between the Jews and the Muslims. Now pause. We are in this era where constantly we're bombarded with this ideology from the media that there's conflict between Jews and Muslims in the Middle East, and this is kind of naturally how it is. But that's not how it is. Historically speaking, Jews and Muslims sought refuge with each other against the Christian barbarians coming from Europe. During the Crusades, the Arabs, the Eastern Christians, the Eastern Jews, the Eastern Muslims, they all sought refuge with one another against the heathen, sort of fanatical Europeans coming from the West. So what happens now is you have a complete flip of the narrative. Now the Zionists are siding with the Europeans, the ardent European Christians. Opposition was minimal, even though the Jewish the cabinet, that member of the cabinet, he was in opposition. The opposition was minimal, and he was one of a few. He was outvoted, and the cabinet basically allowed this to pass. And immediately, the British Foreign Secretary Arthur Balfour, he wrote a telegram to Baron Rothschild. This is the Balfour Declaration of 1917. So I think I have a quote from it. It says, "His Majesty's government view the favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and they will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this objective." Now, who is Baron Rothschild? He's a lord. He's the highest ranking Jewish official in the House of Lords, and a member of the World Zionist Federation. The Rothschild, they're basically a Jewish banking company. They've, for the past 350 years, they even have branches now in Austria, France, Germany. I think one of their children, one of their descendants, they started the Swiss bank. He's worth like $100 billion or something like that. So they're wealthy. They transcend politics, basically. They don't care who's controlling, because they have all the money. You know, they transcend politics. So what Arthur Balfour does, he sets this in stone by sending this telegram to the Rothschild, Baron Rothschild. Now look at what's happening here. The same land has been promised to three different peoples. First, we talked about the British promising it with the French and the Russians, right? Jordan, Transjordan, Istanbul. Now you have this promising of Palestine to the Zionists. So this shows, this really shows how duplicitous the British were. I mean, they're promising Arab freedom, and they've already negotiated with the French and Germans. So once again, actually, the Muslims found out about the Balfour Declaration. They found out about the Sykes-Picot Agreement as well, but that was top secret, and that just came out because of something that was happening. You know, the Bolsheviks, they took over the Tsars, but that's, you know, besides the point. So because of that, the Arabs found out, and they still continue to trust the Brits. The Brits, very diplomatically, they were like, no, this is nothing. You know, this is something else. You know, we're still promising you the land. And the Arabs believed them. And after the Balfour Declaration, the Arabs still believed them for the second time. They fooled themselves. They deluded themselves. So this is what happens, basically. The Balfour Declaration is established. In 1920s, you start, you know, land is being stripped away to, you know, from the Palestinians, and there's clashes between Jews and Muslims for the first time. The Jewish population of Palestine, it was under 17% until 1930s. It was like under 5% before 1914s, but, you know, gradually you see this expansion, this goal of the greater Israel being fulfilled. Now, Hitler's rise to power, that changed everything. And basically in America, Jews didn't want the Zionist movement. You know, they thought it was ludicrous to have a home specifically designed for the Jews. But after Hitler's rise to power and his genocidal policies, everyone kind of started supporting the Zionist movement, the UN, etc. So in just 5 years, you have a doubling of the Jewish population in Palestine. 174,000 additional Jews enter, and homes are being stripped away from the Palestinians. The Palestinians, they're not the Nazis responsible for the genocidal policies, but they're bearing the brunt of this. They are, you know, they're the ones who are paying the price. So this kind of continues. 1937, Britain decided to turn the problem over to the UN. They can't be bothered anymore. This doesn't, you know, it's too much for them to deal. So what the UN does under pressure, it proposes a two-state solution in which the land is divided, one for the Arabs, one for the Jews. Now, the shocking thing is the Jews are given, first of all, the most fertile land, and the Jews make up 1/3 of the population, and they only own 8%, yet they are given 56% of the land. And the Arabs that make up 2/3 of the population are given the least fertile land, and they're given 43% of Palestine, right? So this is what's going on under Zionist pressure. This is what is happening. And well, Zionist leaders, they start taking advantage of their superior military technology, and they start invading, and slowly but surely they start taking over major cities in Palestine. This is a systematic expulsion and an ethnic cleansing of Palestine is taking place. One of the greatest, I think, it was the massacre of Deir Yassin. This was one of the most horrific massacres. I mean, it was shocking, really. There's much worse, but this was the shock, right? 100 men, women, and children were systematically just murdered. They were just shot randomly, right, by Israeli forces. This led to hundreds of thousands of Palestinians. Basically, they're already being expelled. The Israeli army, they took over a large part of the designated Palestinian state even. So we spoke about the two-state solution. The Israelis are expanding into the designated Palestinian state as well now. Yeah, this is what's happening. This is what was happening throughout the 20th century.
I think that's helped understand, you know, kind of how they got control of that. And also kind of why the Muslims were so half asleep, basically, the whole time. I think we're coming to a close of our time. I want to move on to the final question for now,
Yeah.
which actually leads on very nicely, actually, which is if it was so easy, the way you've made it sound, what stopped them from, you know, if they were, for example, this incident, the Yassin incident, if they were happy to kind of murder 100 people, why didn't they, you know, or why don't they take over the entire the Gaza Strip and the bit of the West
Mm.
Bank where they have Palestine? Why don't they take full control and kind of make it easier for themselves?
Now, actually, this did happen temporarily. They took over West Bank and Gaza during 1967, and basically a war ensued, and this resulted in like parts of Transjordan being taken away from the Israelis. And that's where that's the establishment of West Bank and Gaza. That's what happened. So in West Bank, there was kind of like a puppet government from the Palestinians that they set up there, and in Gaza as well. But then obviously Hamas took over. In 2005, they were democratically elected. So this was a result of war that the land was stripped away from them. But I think in terms of modern politics, Israel doesn't finish off Palestine. It's because basically like Israeli politics, it falls into two camps. So it's not like just right wing or left wing, because they're all right wing. They want to go towards this idea of greater Israel. They want the whole land. They want the coming of their Messiah. They're still waiting for that, right? So it falls into the annexation camp and the control camp. The annexationists, they're the Jewish extremists. They want to formally seize large chunks of Palestinian land while expelling or denying political rights to residents. Basically they want to continue the ethnic cleansing or the apartheid. Now the control camp, they have a similar ideology, but they prioritize the protection of Israeli citizens from like Hamas terror attacks, etc. They say that this is a threat, but realistically we know it's not a threat. Hamas is not a threat at all to Israel. But the control camp has more of a left-leaning ideology than the annexationist camp. Now what is happening is Netanyahu in the recent elections, his party, the Likud party, I think it dropped from 36 seats to 31 seats. So what's happening is to gain political support from the annexation camp, what he's doing is he's continuing this war. He's starting this war again. He's finding an excuse to attack the Palestinians, to attack the Gazans. So renewing peace with Hamas would jeopardize this agenda of greater Israel, and it wouldn't attract support from the right-wing factions of the Israeli terrorist state. That's one of the reasons. Now, what that leads to is Israeli-Palestinian warfare has become routinized because of this. So what is happening is, basically, to clarify, Gaza is used as a scapegoat. So whenever leaders want political support from right-wing factions in Israel, they will provoke, and they will start a war. Hamas will retaliate, and they will use this excuse to attack children in Gaza. The atrocities that are happening right now, they will use as an excuse to inflict those atrocities upon the Gazans. So yeah, I mean, if they completely take over Gaza, there's going to be no kind of element. There's going to be nothing to take over to appease the right-wing fascists, right? So they're going to have to look for new things to appease them. So the easiest thing in the short term is to kind of have this recurring routine violence, between a cycle of violence, rather. I mean, the events that have led to this point, they're unique. I mean, the events that happened at the beginning of last week, they're unique. I mean, but in essence, it's actually a recurring pattern determined by structural factors in the conflict. And it's been the same situation for the past 15 years. You had the same kind of cycle of violence in 2008, 2009, 2012, the war in 2014 as well between Hamas and Israel. So what Israel does is it provokes. I mean, it injures 300 peaceful worshippers in Al-Aqsa during the last nights of Ramadan. It denies people the very basic of human rights. It bulldozes settlements repeatedly, one after the other, imposes harsh blockades on Gaza that limits flows of goods into the territory. The root cause of this cycle is Israel's insistence on denying the very basic of human rights for Palestinians, applying draconian measures against Palestinians in every sense, depriving them the right to move, to work, to own their property, the right to self-determination. These rights are revoked from them, from Palestinians within Israeli territory. They're not in any decision-making bodies. They're not in the council. They're not allowed to vote. Palestinians in West Bank or Gaza, they have no input in any of the policy making. They're not allowed to vote. They're constantly bombarded by Israeli military intrusions. Women and children, they're harassed at checkpoints. Children are shot on the way to school on a day. Imagine education, we take it so lightly. youth nowadays, they want to be on road, they want to, like, be roadmen, etc., etc. But these people, they are literally risking their lives to go to school every single day. They could be shot by an Israeli military officer. These people, right? I mean, the whole system, it's built endemic. Within it, it's inbuilt racism, vulgar ultra-nationalism. It's built in a cynical way to prevent them building. They've confined them in little islands so that most of the land can be occupied by the Israeli territory, for Israeli settlement. The media tries to blame Hamas all the time, right? It tries to blame Hamas all the time. They blame the react instead of the act. You always hear the BBC reporter saying, was Hamas justified in its attack? They blame the react instead of the act, right? And what happens is Israel flares the situation to appease the right-wing extremists. Why? Because Hamas is why does the media demonize Hamas so much? Because it's the only spark in the Palestinian spirit today. The media tries to claim that, they're trying to take over other rival parties like PA. The PA is a puppet government anyway, right? So they claim that they wanted to take over the PA. They want political support. How does this make any sense? What political support, what political power are they going to get in a completely derelict region? If that was the case, they would have recognized Israel as a legitimate authority, as a legitimate state that would have reaped them political, economic, and social benefits. So, it doesn't make any sense. The Western narrative, it doesn't make any sense. No matter how puny Hamas are compared to Israel, they aim to unite the Palestinians under Allah, under the Quran, and they defend them with all their might. Because of the perpetual oppression, you have Hamas defending the dignity of the Palestinians, right? But once the fighting starts, it's not clear how much it will escalate. Sometimes it's quick and swift and it ends, but sometimes it's like in 2008 and 2009 and 12 and 14, where it turned into an all-out war with hundreds of Palestinian casualties. Current fighting in the region is moving into that direction. I think, as you mentioned before the live started, Netanyahu, he said that he wants to completely eradicate Gaza. I'm not aware of any such statement he's made in a previous war between Palestine and Israel. So it really seems as if it's ending towards,
Yeah, to be honest, I've not seen, not even personally, I've not been this interested in the situation as much as now. I've not seen so many imams talking about it. I've not seen Muslims this aware of the situation. Previously, people have known, but not this much, not this many protests. And it's because, considering the COVID situation, we are going to have to end it there, Majid. Jazakallah khair for sharing everything, man. That was amazing. It was really good, man. I don't think I was making notes quick enough, but I got some really, it was really beautiful the way you outlined a lot of the things, because it went quickly, but he gave a good outline from, I think, the Ottomans all the way through to right today, basically till today's announcement, which you just finished on. From Imad, do you want to say something to Majid?
I've got so many questions for him. But
go on, just ask.
It'll have to be for another time. So
all right, okay.
Okay, we'll continue for a bit. I mean, we're not that strict with schedule, are we? Or are we?
Yeah.
We've got Hamdan next, so you can do one question, man. Your most interesting question, and then because Hamdan's waiting.
It's difficult to decide what the most interesting question is, but in terms of so obviously you outlined the history of the Ottoman Empire and the decline of the Ottoman Empire and how that led to the division and the divide and conquer by the Europeans, sort of, and how how the Jews ended up in that part of the land, and how they wanted to establish a Zionist state or a Jewish state because they await their Messiah. Did Jews exist in that part of the world before?
In Palestine?
In Palestine, yeah. And were they able to freely live with the Muslims and the Christian there? And if that was the case, if that was the case, then how did the Jews coming in convince those Jews who were already there to form an Israeli state, or to form the state?
I mean, first of all, the percentage of Jews that existed before 1914, it was like 3%-ish. So they're a very small minority in Palestine, but actually the Muslims and Jews in the Arabian Peninsula, they have been, very tight with each other. They've been friends. They've been in alliance for the past 1,000 years, and so when we speak about Zionism, we're not speaking about the Jews that are in the Arabian Peninsula, the Arab Jews. We're talking about Jews that have been shipped from Europe, Jews that don't have any right to the land. They have no they don't have any family living there. They have this supposed religious root because
I think Hamdan's going to go deep on this particular question, Imad.
Why is there so much hatred and this sort of, even if they weren't there and if they're not entitled to the land, why do they feel this sense of like entitlement or false entitlement?
I mean, it's part of indoctrination. I mean, I was watching a video earlier. The kids in schools, they're literally taught to hate Arabs. They're literally taught to hate them. I think one of the things the teacher asked was like, what do you feel when you see an Arab? And the kid was just like, I feel like I want to kill him.
So then the original Jews, so they would kind of, the original actual Jews who would have been Arabs.
They don't support Zionism. They
would be opposed by the Zionists.
They are. Yeah, they are opposed by Zionists. They're called self-hating Jews by the Zionists. This is a title that they've given Jews who oppose the Zionist movement. In protests, some of the most formidable supporters of the Palestinian cause are Jews. They are Jews. They're the real Jews, the Orthodox Jews. They will, so this is a problem in the Muslim Ummah, actually. We actually mix up anti-Semitism with anti-Zionism. The both of them, they are not, they are literally mutually exclusive, right? They are independent of each other completely. We are not anti-Semites. We are anti-Zionist. It's like sort of comparing all Muslims to ISIS. If ISIS was a state, that would be Israel, basically, but for the Muslims. So that's what it is. But the problem is
a shift in where the Zionists have sort of hijacked the term anti-Semitism. So anything you say against, say, of Israel, they will just say, or they will hide under the blanket of you being anti-Semitic.
Jazakallah khair, man. We're gonna have to
leave it there with Majid. This is quite important. This is quite important.
Imad,
let me ask him while he's still here. What is
we'll have him on for another podcast, man, because I'm gonna have to. It's gonna be Maghrib time, man. We don't delay Maghrib for everyone.
That's true.
But yeah, Jazakallah Majid. Jazakallah. I think everyone enjoyed having you. It was really nice. I enjoyed it anyway. It would be nice to have you maybe on one of our normal podcasts, which we can maybe discuss different things as well. We can go more into other topics, but we'll hopefully arrange that in the future, inshallah. But Jazakallah khair, Majid. And hopefully we'll see you soon, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.
Yeah, Jazakallah khair.
Barakallah feek. Okay, Mad.
I wanted to ask him the most important question, which was like, what does the future plan out like in?
He's not God, bro.
I know, but
I know he's clever. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi
wa barakatuh. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakallah khair for having us here today. Thank you for organizing this as well.
I wanted to jump straight in because basically when we finished with Majid said that 3% of the people in Palestine were Jews, were already Jews, and then I think Hamdan wanted to touch on how the Jews aren't real Jews. So if you want to start with that, because we're following straight on from Majid's ending kind of point.
So the current state of Jews that we have is formed by which is called European Jews. They aren't actually Orthodox Jews, they don't have the same beliefs. For example, just like Majid was saying, that actual Jews are actually against the state of Israel. They oppose it. They don't agree with it. They understand that they were kicked out of the land and they do not belong to any land whatsoever. So these European Jews were actually migrated around 1500s, and they came into Europe, and they seek refuge under the banner of Judaism, so they do not get prosecuted by the religious leaders at the time. For example, the Christians, the Muslims, and so on, because they were pagans, they would simply be killed for having such beliefs. So that's how they established, themselves under the we'll call them the European Jews banner, and hence why they're the ones who obviously created the movement. Like Majid was saying, very, very, very intense and very educational what Majid has said. And following on from there, that's how they established the Zionism that we currently have today later on.
Mm. So then, where did most of them? So they were kind of originally living in Europe.
No, they
so
weren't originally living in Europe. They actually migrated from Russia. They migrated
oh,
from
they migrated from Russia.
Okay.
From Russia to Europe.
There was a tribe called Kazakh, I believe. It's different pronunciation, but they belonged to that tribe, and then they moved into Europe, and they obviously converted to Judaism at the time.
Okay.
So obviously we understand there's obviously great tragedy currently taking place in Palestine, and it's not actually getting a great deal of coverage by the mainstream media, and what coverage it is getting even is very manipulative. The conflict between Palestine and Zionist occupiers today have been going on for over 75 years now. According to the United Nations, between 2008 and up to 2020, over 130,289 people, Palestinian people, have been affected with this conflict. And during this current attack, 1,442 people, including 213 killed, with 61 being children and 36 being women, so far have been died. Inna lillahi wa inna ilaihi raji'un, because of what's going on.
So current, you mean starting from the end of Ramadan, basically?
That's correct. Yes, following on from 27th of Ramadan. And the latest interview done by the Israeli Prime Minister said that they're not going to stop anytime soon. They are not going to stop anytime soon. The last attack like this took place in 2014, which led for 6 weeks. So, if they're not going to stop anytime soon, only Allah knows, obviously, how long this is going to last. But,
I think, as Majid said earlier,
tragedy.
it was, the reason why, those political reasons about the people in power in Israel trying to appease, the right wing, sort of they're all right wing, but the most extreme right wings, the extremists, into like getting votes. I think this is in the balance, and this is what we're kind of have to deal with. But I just want to pick up on a comment. Habib, can you see the comments?
Yeah. Which one?
The Hamza Iqbal one. So this is quite interesting. And this leads on to what Hamdan was saying as well.
Yeah, so as in the Zionist state was created for the so-called protection of the European Jews. I mean, I think obviously
That's
Majid
correct.
mentioned that became more emotionally kind of possible, especially after before World War II with the Nazis, and what happened there.
Also, what people also forget, that you don't have to be a Jew to be a Zionist. You can be a Christian and be Zionist. You could be a Muslim and be Zionist. It's just a belief that you support the ideology of Jews having their own state. So, but yeah, the brother said it really well as well. Yeah, that's, I 100% agree with that.
And I think the tensions are like, if you try and tell people to condemn the atrocities in Israel, especially non-Muslim people, because obviously the power of social media today is like on platforms like Twitter, you can reach so many people that you're not even friends with. Like, you can have an impression, that tweet can reach like thousands of people, depending on what hashtag you use, where you tweet it and stuff, and who retweets it. You can reach actually thousands of people. And people might say, okay, there's no point of preaching to the converted because probably everyone on your friend list knows what you're going to say anyway, Muslim or non-Muslim. But I think it's important to sort of get the message out there and sort of do as much as you can. So even the Palestinian people appreciate that there is solidarity there by the rest of the world. And I think we haven't even gone into like the protests and stuff like that that are happening, and like, you know, the whole world is in protest, and you can see the
Yeah,
numbers of people.
on Saturday we've got one in Colchester. Everyone who's here from Colchester better be there on Saturday,
Inshallah.
man. I'm taking Dhuhr off work to try and be there, inshallah, or to be there, inshallah. So
Inshallah.
Saturday,
We can do it in Castle Park together.
Saturday, Castle Park. So everyone should be there, inshallah. Hamdan was going to actually talk about this. Like, what else can we kind of do to help? So
I think before we talk about what we can do, I think it's important that we discuss what has led to the oppression of Palestinians at the moment, and in order to understand this, the first we have to establish who our enemy is, and according to the Quran and Hadith, Shaitan is a clear enemy to humans, and more importantly to those who are on a straight path. So if a nation is committing crimes such as currently being committed in Palestine, for example, we have to understand that the Shaitan got the best of them, and so we have to make dua for those who have been affected first of all, and for them who have been misled by Shaitan, so our Rabb may guide them. And Shaitan only attacks those who are more concerned with their worldly desires rather than creating a better akhirah, meaning people have forgotten that this life is merely just a test, and they don't remember death enough, whereas death is the only guarantee we have left. You know, that's the only true promise, is the death. And when we have people who practice such way of thinking, and have basically given all ammunition to Shaitan to corrupt us from within, just like Brother Majid was saying as well. At the end of the day, whenever there is a collapse of Islamic civilization, whether that's the Ottoman, whether that's the Mughal, whether that's in historically, it's always been within first. And these are the things, the number one cause of oppression is corruption of hearts, and not remembering death. Now, I'm not saying that we shouldn't aim to be successful in the world, but instead we should look at the Sahabas, who were, some of the Sahabas were the most wealthy people at the time, but what did they do? They sacrificed their life for the sake of Allah, and they sacrificed their worldly life to gain a better akhirah. Our enemies are using this corruption in our hearts to bribe our leaders for small worldly gains. They're dividing us through colonization. They're destroying our belief system. They have destroyed our educational system and political systems. And when they leave us, we are left fighting one another. And this method is really well known as divide and conquer. Disconnecting from Allah and our Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, the way of life he has led to, disconnecting from Allah and his Nabi Muhammad would lead to a life of oppression, and among many of the practices currently being taken place on earth. And what we can do to help is Allah says he doesn't change the condition of people until they change from within themselves. So if we truly want to help, if we truly want to make a difference, we first have to start from ourselves, individually. Before we can work in community, before we can work anywhere else, we have to first start individually as an individual to do anything. We have to then educate ourselves and raise awareness, which like you fairly mentioned earlier, there isn't enough awareness. Maybe COVID has played a great role, alhamdulillah, that people had time to think and reflect, and then they actually standing up more, because the current things that are taking place in Palestine right now, they are not new. They are not new. It's just people have become more conscious to things like that, where they've had time to maybe think and reflect. So I
think maybe this all links together a bit, as in because of COVID, people have been thinking a bit more. So when maybe the same thing happened, Maybe the same thing that happened in 2014 happened now, but this time because of people maybe taking your first, but maybe remembering death a bit more because of COVID, maybe actually having priority, realizing that priority is akhirah. Like we're gonna
That's correct.
die.
100%.
Because that's actually really important. This point, like if you can be bribed with a bit of wealth, you're a liability to the ummah.
You are.
Like,
You're
I
a
mean,
traitor. And what
if
happens
you
to
are the prime
traitors?
minister, if you were the prime minister, if you were the president, if you were the Khalifa of the Muslims, you would be a liability. So I know it might be a big thing. Like, imagine you're the Khalifa, but would your number one thing actually be based on Deen, based on Islam, based on Akhirah, or would you? Because then, I mean, we can blame the corruption for the prime ministers of our countries, but if we were prime ministers, if we would be just as corrupt, then we wouldn't be much better solutions. Does that make sense,
We
Suman?
will be just
Look
we will
confused.
be just as corrupt. You're absolutely right. I think no matter who will be the prime minister or who will be the leader, we will be just as corrupt if we are not upon the Sunnah and Quran. So as long as we solely desire to live in this life for the sake of Allah, which is our sole purpose, then we would never have to worry about corruption because it would not exist. You know, like I've heard this saying where if you listen to Quran or if you recite Quran in the same heart, music cannot go in, you know. And using that as an example, like if you're so solely connected to Allah and the sole purpose is to please Allah, the corruption, it just doesn't have room to exist. And that's why, you know, they like I mentioned, you know, the enemies of Islam, the enemies of human beings in general, because they're, you know, not just Muslims get affected, not just Muslims have been colonized. There have been many other countries who've been colonized who are non-Muslim. So just to prevent, and you know, that from taking place, we have to be more connected with Allah and His Messenger, because it's our duty to protect those who cannot protect themselves. But how are we going to do that when we can't even protect ourselves to start with? You know. So going back to what I was saying is it's important that we start with ourselves, we educate ourselves, we raise awareness in our own homes, families, and society. We are one ummah, and it's about time that we start to live and breathe this again. We have to.
Yeah, go on, Gary. Sorry.
We have to implement Quran and Sunnah in our life more than ever. We need to protect ourselves from things that are designed to slowly corrupt our hearts and take us away from the purpose of life. For example, you know, wasting time with people who are actually taking you away from Allah. You know, we should surround ourselves with communities or people or friends that are actually bring us closer to Allah. Not just say, "Oh no, it's all right, mate. Let's just do this and get over it. We live. There's another day. We could do it tomorrow." We know we need to follow these things very strictly to actually help and make a difference in the community. We need to lead by an example for our children, families, and society, and we need to speak as it is. You know, speak directly without any fear other than Allah. You know, we need to eradicate our personal feelings and think how Ummah feels as a whole, because the Prophet ﷺ said that we are one body. You know, families need to establish better communication with their local masjids. That's very important, because if you're just keeping your faith to yourself and in your homes, guess what? It's not a ummah. It's like it becomes an individual faith. Then you're bound to make your own interpretation of your deen, and that's the biggest problem that we have today. That people have their own meaning of deen individually rather than what we should have as a selective, as a ummah. I mean, for example, parents can wake you up for school, but they don't wake you up for Fajr. You know,
That's an
and that
interesting
leads.
thing. I think we've been discussing this quite a bit. I think Shaheen done a 2-hour thing on this, and in our Mabahith group, it's come up quite a few times. Like, and I think I put it on my status, which I've done, like about Fajr and protests. Like, because I mean, there is a link. I mean, you could say, I think somebody described it as a kind of a false dichotomy, as in you can't link the two. But surely there is some kind of a link. If you're not acting on what you're preaching, if you're kind of believing in the freedom of Islam, but it's not really in your heart, then is there really kind of You know, I mean, that's surely coming under you're saying
100%.
something which isn't
It
authentic.
comes under hypocrisy,
Uh,
which is not a good thing as a Muslim. You cannot have a Muslim cannot be a hypocrite. That we associate these things with kafirs, with non-believers, or people who are uneducated in the way of Allah. You know, so we cannot have hypocrisy attached to us as an attribute, as a human being, as a Muslim anyway. But you know, if
Ahmad, what are you saying,
obviously.
man?
No, I
Sorry,
was just
please.
saying, Jazakallah khair, Hamdan. It's really true. You know, sometimes we forget. We try to find the bigger fish, but we forget, like Fajr, like you said. You know, and the parents can wake the children up for school, but they can't wake the children up for Fajr. And we have loads of problems within ourselves which we need to solve as well. And turning back to the way of Allah and the Sunnah. So Jazakallah khair for that reminder. I just some action points, I think, before we finish. We mentioned.
I think Majid wanted to jump on for the conclusion.
Okay, yes. But I just wanted to say about just what Hamdan was saying as well. Our responses have to be with education. Like, we can't just, you know, do anything we feel like and just like call anyone out. Oh yeah, you're a Jew, that's why, you know, we don't like you and blah blah blah. We need
Absolutely.
to be educated in the way we do. You know, the word Israel, according to some famous Mufassirun, the word actually means Yaqub alayhi salam. So it's a name of a prophet. It's in Islam.
Prophet.
So if you're trying to deviate that name and say, you know, there's so many that memes and stuff going about, you're actually trying to deviate a word in the Quran, and that's a name given to him. Allah uses that name for Yaqub alayhi salam. Allah uses that name for the children of Israel. So it's, you know, it's something that we have to be educated in our responses and the way we go about things. And I think one of the biggest problems is certain individuals, and even like in the last 2 weeks, I know things have escalated. Like, people are just, I don't know, like smashing things up and, you know, doing this and that. And it's not everyone, it's the minority of Muslims. But unfortunately, this is what the media picks up on. The media will
That's
pick
correct.
up on one or two things that happen, and, you know, oh, someone went into this synagogue and did this and blah blah blah. And majority of the Muslims will condemn it.
I think in that case, you would be disagreeing with this comment on the screen then.
I think what Hamza is trying to say is completely separate Judaism from Zionism, because one thing is, I think all Zionists, well, actually, no, this is a wrong question. You can't generalize, but the people who are in Israel, the Zionist Jews, actually believe the state of Israel to be part of their faith, as was explained earlier, right? But not all Jews believe the state of Israel to be part of their faith. So it doesn't go both ways. And I think that's the issue there. And like we said earlier, you know, I was in a forum this morning, and mashallah, loads of really amazing, you know, very well educated and well versed, you know, very articulate Muslim brothers and sisters were able to stand up for, in an anti-racism forum, every single individual mentioned a statement for, you know, for Palestine, and condemning the, you know, the illegal acts that the state of Israel are doing at the moment and have done, and, you know, are calling for, like, you know, people in power to make statements, because there are certain people who are on the fence, like apolitical people who are non-Muslims. They won't really say anything about it. And if these people are shifted, and they are the true people that can make the difference, but then it's a circular thing. So you'll tell them, oh, are you not going to condemn the violence and the atrocities, the murders that are happening? And they'll say, oh, so why won't you condemn Hamas and the rockets that they're firing? But I don't think it's a fair fight in that sense. That I think this is what the education that needs to be made is, on one side you have people going into the bomb shelters in Israel, and on the other side you have people going into their graves as like shuhada. So it's not a fair thing, and I think the world is starting to realize, and everyone subliminally knows. However, I think we just need to carry on social media, carry on with those hashtags. And I know, you know, Twitter and Instagram have blocked certain hashtags and restricted them, but people are finding a way around them. You know, they're changing the spellings on the hashtags. And, you know, if you speak the truth and if you stand for truth, it will always go heard in the end. Maybe a certain time you might feel that no one's listening. You might feel like you're getting blockaded from every direction and everyone's trying to stop you. But truth will prevail at the end, because that's what the Quran says. جاء الحق وزهق الباطل إن الباطل كان زهوقا. So, truth will prevail and falsehood will perish, because falsehood was always destined to perish.
100%.
True, man. Beautiful.
So
Hamdan,
going further
um,
in regards,
yeah, go on, man. Let's carry on.
Go on, inshallah.
so
Go.
just want to
Inshallah.
make one last point, just to finish it off for you all. So as obviously Ummah, we are one Ummah, and it is our responsibility to act as one rather than individuals. So what the question is, how can we unite to prevent further tragedies like this from happening? And once again, it does start from within and our small communities, and we need to eliminate nationalism from our local masjids. When we enter masjid, we need to leave everything outside other than the fact that we are Muslim and we are one. We need to leave our parents' mentality behind, and raise our children with mentality that we are one Muslim Ummah. The nationalist mentality originates from colonialism, and unfortunately it still plays a huge role in dividing Muslim Ummah everywhere in the world. For example, we were one country under one rule, and look at us now. We need to look at the root of the problem rather than the symptoms. We are being divided and focus on eliminating the problem rather than the root. We need to eliminate the problem from its roots rather than focusing on the symptoms. The leaders of the community need to spend more time within the community and give more responsibilities to younger generation to prime them to be future leaders. We are more focused on what the enemies are doing and just talking about it, rather than we should be coming together and thinking about what we can do to help our people. And the way we can do that is by building the relationship with communities, spending more time with them and educating them. By doing this, we will have more unity in our local masjid, and then will lead to more prosper Islamic community, which will allow our children to be great ambassadors of Islam. And I would like to finish by saying that our enemies aren't going to help us. We need to stop looking towards the enemies of Islam to help us. We have to help ourselves. And Allah says that it is our responsibility as Muslims to stand against oppressors and resist being oppressed. And Jazakallah khair.
Jazakallah khair, Hamdan. That was amazing, man. Alhamdulillah. It's like I wasn't expecting like Hamdan to add like a spiritual touch to everything, but alhamdulillah, man, that was really nice. It's so important, I think, those points. And I kind of feel happy that Hamdan's in Colchester, because obviously the masjid, we've just kind of finished building the masjid. And hopefully, we've got like a place now for Muslims to kind of hang out a bit more. And if Hamdan's around and all of the boys are around,
Inshallah.
we've actually got a place to be, together and to actually unite. And it's looking good, man, inshallah. But Jazakallah khair, that was good. Okay, Jazakallah Hamdan. Hamdan, that was really good, man.
Alhamdulillah, thank you for having us. Thank you for obviously Majid and the other speakers as well. And thank you for obviously organizing this as well, Habiba and Ahmad. Really appreciate your time.
Barakallah fiqh. Okay, so Majid's just going to come on for a conclusion. And then inshallah, it's going to be literally 2 minutes. So by 8:35, we need to finish. Majid, inshallah. I'm going to end the stream at 8:35, inshallah. But I just wanted to hear.
Oh,
8:36.
No, what? Wait, no, I mean, you set out an itinerary, and I was kind of confused when the conclusion was, but yeah, anyways, I just wanted to say I agreed with what Hamdan said. Like, what he was saying was pretty true, like, innal batil kana zahuqa, right? Like, but in its very essence, falsehood is meant to perish, and like, people just sort of wait for the end times, like, people wait for Al-Mahdi and like Isa alayhi salam to come, but they don't really solve their problems in their own microcosms. They don't solve the problems in their own communities. Yeah, basically.
That's good, man. Jazakallah.
Just one, I think
Brother
the brother
Majid.
wanted to ask the question about, I think someone else mentioned it as well. An absolute distinction between Zionism and Judaism.
No, there isn't.
Yeah.
There isn't. I didn't say there's an absolute distinction between Zionism and Judaism. It did start off with, Zionists who wanted to fulfill the prophecy. They wanted to fulfill the prophecy, of a greater Israel for Jews. So there is a religious aspect to it. Everyone is religiously driven. The Muslims are religiously driven. They have this spirit of Salah ad-Din. They want to come and liberate the Holy Land. This is the kind of attitude that the Muslims have. The Jews have a similar attitude, but we can't mix the two things together, because Orthodox Jews, they make it very clear that this is not the prophecy. In fact, in the Torah, it actually says, it restricts the Jews from having their own self-governed land. So there is kind of a contradiction in Zionist ideology. But the problem does stem, there is a religious dimension to it, but it's a lot more political now, because the Israelis, they don't discriminate between Muslims and Christians, right? The Christians are bearing the brunt just like the Muslims are, the same amount. Christians are not allowed to visit their holy places in Jerusalem on a Sunday, the same way that Muslims aren't allowed to do the same thing. So it's not Jews versus Muslim, or it's not like, it's basically Zionists versus everyone. But there is a religious dimension to it. And I think Gallup carried out a poll in America a few years ago, and 95% of people in America, 95% of Jews, they were in favor of the Zionist movement. So I feel like it's kind of state terrorism, but it's under the pretext of, like, if you don't support it, then you're anti-Semite. So it's like, it's much more dangerous, because it's a disillusionment. It's like a delusion of knowledge. It's a manipulation of knowledge.
Jazakallah khair, Majid. That's a really good, man. Alhamdulillah. We're going to have to conclude it there, or end it there, sorry. Jazakallah for your conclusion. I just wanted to get a one-word answer, Majid. Sorry. Somebody asked about a book for teenagers, like a young, like their children. Is there anything that you'd recommend reading to kind of be more informed about this particular topic, the topic of Palestine and its creation?
The topic of Palestine, I would recommend watching a documentary called Occupation 101. It's not on YouTube, but I found it on some pirating site, and it's very comprehensive in its details of, like, what happened since the beginning of the Zionist movement up until now. So that's very comprehensive if you want one documentary. Also watch like Yasir Qadi's documentaries on 1914. There's two actually, and also he has one on the printing press, which is what inspired me in my talk today, because I thought it was a different view to the idea of the decline of the Ottomans, and it was very symbolic in nature. So I thought it was a different nuance.
That's interesting. Inshallah, in the future podcast where we speak on, we'll pick up on the printing press idea, because although I do understand the points, I've got a bit of critique on that. Inshallah, I haven't actually heard the Yasir Qadi lecture, so I will listen to that. Inshallah, Jazakallah khair for informing us, and Jazakallah khair for the analysis and the summary, because it takes a lot of time and effort to kind of gather all this information and be able to present it in such a, mashallah, comprehensive way. So Jazakallah khair for that. So in the end,
Jazakallah khair, everyone, for coming, and inshallah, Majid will hopefully be inviting him back on for a podcast anyway, and I'll see you all hopefully on our next podcast, whenever that is. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.